What's up, everybody? This is Chris Surratt bringing you another edition of the Car Concierge Show, the show that helps with the buying, selling, maintaining, and repairing of your vehicle. On today's show, we're going to check out a couple of topics. We're going to check out the fact that there's still racism in car dealerships, and we're still dealing with it to some degree. We're also going to talk about Stellantis and how they are still dealing a lot with the new moves with the automotive industry, and to the point where they are shutting down production at one of their plants over in Canada, but still not shutting down completely, but slowing down production at one of their plants in Canada. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the Trump administration and its moves in the automotive industry as far as he has been in office, over the last month. It's a big old story. I wanted to go over it. It's going to touch a lot of points, so that might take a little while. So buckle up. All right, so first off, let's check out a story about a young man over in Illinois who is suing his dealership for, racial discrimination and things of that such. And of course, in this situation, I guess the dealership is not new to such things. Let's check it out.
That's right, Rob. The dealership named in this complaint is the same one which just 2 years ago paid out $10 million to settle a lawsuit brought against it by the FTC and the Illinois Attorney General's office, which at the time claimed the dealer charged its black customers higher fees than their white customers. Andre Jennings is living in a homeless shelter with his 5-year-old daughter and his fiancée.
Damn.
It is not where this former auto dealership worker expected to find himself after being fired from his job as a salesperson at Ed Napleton's Elmhurst Imports Kia dealer back in April of 2022. He is now suing the dealership for racial discrimination.
It's been crazy. I lost my house. I lost my car. Everything.
The lawsuit, filed back in September of last year, alleges that Jennings, who worked at the dealership for around 3.5 years, was routinely subjected to racial slurs by his supervisor, and that he was paid less than his white colleagues.
He would tell me straight up, take this deal back to finance. And this would happen quite often.
Jennings' attorney is calling on the dealership to, among other things, make their former employee whole by paying out the back pay he has lost since losing his job.
We had several employees, past and current employees, who are who are identified as African Americans, who now want to either join this lawsuit or start their own.
And because this particular dealership has previously been the subject of a racial discrimination lawsuit filed against it by the Illinois Attorney General's office, during which it was forced to pay out $10 million to settle, Paul Jackson believes the company should be forced to pay punitive damages as well.
The difference between the last lawsuit and this lawsuit is the fact that those were customers, and now we're talking about employees.
Now, we have reached out to the attorneys for Ed Napleton for a response, but as of now, we have not received one.
So, of course, we all understand that there is some aspect of racism or whatnot that the world still lives with, But I mean, it really comes off as more of a bias in some situations. So it's hard to tell. I only believe in the racism in the form of a person in power. If a person in power is, doing things to affect somebody's, job or their money or anything like that, from a position of power because of that person's skin color, then that's what I consider racism. Calling somebody the N-word or calling a white person the H-word or all these slurs and things like that is just, sticks and stones, I believe in. But if it's a situation where it affects your money, affects your ability to make money, it affects your livelihood to any degree, then that's the racism that I would see and I would attack and I would try to destroy. We're gonna read a little bit on this story because I wanted to. They said that this company had previously already paid $10 million for things that they were doing to, their African American customers. So I wanted to read the story as well, see if there's any more about that. Let's check it out. Wait, hold on. Where was it? All right. A discrimination lawsuit filed by. Okay, this is more about the future part of this story. Okay, discrimination lawsuit against Illinois Kia dealership group headed to arbitration. So this story is a continuous from the previous story about him, filing the lawsuit, the discrimination lawsuit, and everything like that. But now they're stating that it's going into arbitration. So let's read this story. This is, of course, our favorite news source, Automotive News. This is a bit written by Riley Hodder, and it's from February 21st, which was my birthday. A discrimination lawsuit filed by a black former employee against Napleton Automotive Group will go to arbitration because the plaintiff doesn't qualify as a transportation worker, an Illinois district judge ruled February 11th. Andrew Jennings alleged Napleton's Kia of Elmhurst in suburban Chicago engaged in unlawful discrimination and retaliation. Jennings signed an arbitration agreement with his former employer, U.S. District Judge John Tharp said. Jennings argued the document did not apply to the case due to a carve-out in the Federal Arbitration Act covering transportation workers. The judge found that Jennings' job duties don't qualify him for that exemption. Jennings' lawyer, Chiquita Hall Jackson of Chicago, said her client will prevail despite the setback. He still will be successful, just maybe we won't have the punitive and compensatory damages that we were hoping for, she said. The suit comes nearly 3 years after the auto group paid $10 million settlement to the Federal Trade Commission for allegedly charging more in finance for black customers and using illegal junk fees. All right, so my question with that is that if there's a $10 million settlement to the Federal Trade Commission, did any of that go to those black customers that were charged these illegal junk fees or with the financing situation? Jennings was hired as a salesman in April 2019. A court document outlining the judge's opinion said he sold cars and arranged for their transportation. In his complaint, Jennings said he was subject to an ongoing racially hostile culture where frequent racial slurs, comments, stereotypes, and jokes were the norm. According to the decision, he also stated that African American employees at the dealership faced more scrutiny than their white counterparts. He was fired in November 2022, something he claims was retaliation for his attempts to report the discrimination he faced. Napleton provided an arbitration agreement signed by Jennings in the court proceedings in which Napleton said Jennings agreed to arbitrate certain legal matters with the employer. Jennings argued that the claim was not valid for two reasons. First, there were concerns about the validity of the document, and second, due to an exemption for transportation workers outlined in the FAA. Though Jennings said he does not remember signing the agreement, he did say the signature was his according to the decision. He said that he had not filled out his printed name and the date on the document and that someone else did so for him. Napleton argued that the printed name and date had been filled out by another employee and that Jennings had been aware of it at the time of his signing. This is going to get deep. The court upheld the validity of the agreement. The court also found that Jennings' duties as a salesman did not qualify him as a transportation worker, thus compelling the suit to arbitration. Even though selling cars is central to what workers in the auto sales class do, it does not involve the interstate movement of goods for purposes of transportation worker exemption, the judge said in the opinion. Jennings must submit his claims to individual arbitration within 60 days of February 11th or notify the court of his intention not to do so. Napleton filed a motion to have the complaint dismissed, which the court denied because of insufficient evidence. This allows Jennings the opportunity to file an appeal at the federal level if he is not satisfied, Hall Jackson said. The lawsuit is a quest for justice for not just Jennings, but for those who come behind him and who currently work under this particular organization, Hall Jackson said. Napleton Automotive Group ranks as number 24 on Automotive News list of top 150 automotive groups, with 20,952 total new vehicles sold in 2023. The group and its lawyers did not respond to requests for comment. All right, so now, mind you, I just made my statements on, what I believe racism is. And this company doesn't seem like it's up to par. Definitely with a filing and a, a finding that they were doing bad things to their black customers to a tune of $10 million to the Federal Trade Commission. And I'm going to still check and see where that money went because with what we've seen over the last couple of days when it comes to Doge and everything, we want to find out where all this money is going after these lawsuits are filed and all these claims are made and all these, all this money is collected. Where'd that $10 million go? Did it go back to those black customers that were defrauded or paid these fees? Probably kind of highly doubted, but I'm going to check that out as well. But the basis really is that we still live in a world where, we're going to deal with some forms of racism. This is definitely a form of racism that happened to, at the very least, the black customers that were going to this Napleton Automotive Group because that was proven. They were found guilty. They were fined. They paid the $10 million fine. So we know that to some degree this Napleton Automotive Group has indulged in racist or negative actions. So now the Jennings situation, he's it's in arbitration, which means that somebody's arbitrating the facts of if he was really discriminated against, if he was really a target by this company, and it's going to some degree probably be extremely hard to prove to some degree, but it just depends if they were really doing what they're saying. And then, of course, their reputation precedes them, so that in turn helps him to some degree. He knows that helps them. The young lady said, Jackson Hall said, that there were other African-American employees who were dealing with the same thing. I don't doubt what he's saying to any degree. It sounds probably right. I've worked in the Midwest in automotive groups and at dealerships. I've dealt with this sort of racism. And it wasn't uncommon back then. Back in Indiana, where I'm from, it was not uncommon. It was not uncommon for the finance department, depending on who the financer was, because of course back then, in most cases you were the token black person. So if there was a black person coming in trying to buy a car, they're gonna head over to you as the black salesman. And then there was situations where, you ran into financiers, or the finance manager who, you take the certain deal to try to get it okayed and they agreed to it and then they try to sell the things on top of it. There was a lot of situations, not a lot, but there were situations where those people were of a racist ilk and, they would reject, all the deals and to some degree, try to stop the sale of certain cars to certain people of color. It's that we know. I know personally that has been true. I've seen it myself. There's no doubt about it. But that, of course, was a long time ago. You hope the world has advanced more at this point than it was back then in Indiana or in Illinois. But this is fairly recent, so you know that to some degree that things haven't changed everywhere. Let's face it. That's what we're talking about. Things have not changed everywhere. There's still going to be pockets of the world where you're going to find people who are racist, who are negative towards people who don't look like them. And it's just something that you're going to continue to have to deal with to weed out those people. And there's not extremely a lot of them anymore. I highly doubt it is. But it depends on where you are, of course. Depends on who you are and who you're talking to. Okay? So let's hope that this automotive group gets its shit together, and this young man gets what he deserves. If what he's stating is true, and if they were trying to do anything to hurt his existence or hurt his ability to make money, then they need to pay up. That's just the way that goes. All right, so let's keep it going. Keep it going. Now, on this show, we continuously fight against, plant closing, people losing their jobs or anything like that. And of course, we're big on Stellantis. We don't like Stellantis. We've always believed that Stellantis was a company that was trying to destroy U.S. automakers, and they've done a fantastic job of it. So, real quick, I want to tell the story about Stellantis as now, of course, Stellantis is putting a halt on some production at one of their plants. This is the plant in Canada. But it is still, a hold on, production, people not being able to work and make money. So, we hate that. I don't care where it is, we're going to hate that. We're not going to look kindly on it. But let's check out what Stellantis is doing. Going to check out this podcaster real quick. His thing. Let's check it out.
Stellantis just slammed the brakes on its Brampton assembly plant in Canada. They were all set to roll out the next-gen Jeep Compass in 2026, but now, production is paused indefinitely due to leadership shakeups and uncertainty surrounding EV tariffs under Trump's policies. Now, Stellantis isn't pulling its $2.8 billion investment just yet, but this move does raise some questions about the future of EVs. And they're not alone. Even Ford is pushing back its next-gen F-150 until 2028. With slowing EV sales and shaky infrastructure, automakers are rethinking their strategy. Are they making the right call, or will they regret hitting the brakes on EV production? Let us know what you think in the comments.
And it's going to continue. It's going to Trump, and this is leading into the last story, but Trump is really putting the automotive industry on its head, specifically with all these tariffs and with all this fear of not being able to produce cars and get the parts that you need from cars, and the lack of reliance on getting parts and the vehicles from America has caused all of these U.S. automakers to go scared, because they've relied extremely way too much on the imports of things to provide the American people with things, specifically cars. Just way too much. And that is what I hope that Trump is going to put a stop to. I hope that the idea is that we are forcing the U.S. automakers and other automakers, even Chinese automakers, to start to produce here in the U.S. and stop relying so much on other places to get things. This is the cornerstone of the automotive industry when it comes to other countries. China, not so much Germany, but the Europe countries, they all rely on the fact that they are, in their contracts, they state that if you're going to sell cars here, you have to have some production here, some fluidity here. You have to have something here that for you to bring your products over here and sell to us, you got to give us something, reciprocity. You got to have a plant over here that builds, the stereos, the engines, I don't care, but something, so that we're not just getting gypped on just purchasing cars. We're just not consumers and not sellers. We have to be sellers and consumers, specifically of certain products. And when it comes to automotive industry, definitely one of those products. Let's check out another little story. I'm gonna read this one. It's a video, but I'm gonna read this because the dude just is kind of lame. But and this is from Bloomberg, another place I get a lot of good stuff from. Stellantis holds Canada plant with strategy for Jeep and FLUX. Bloomberg News, of course, from my birthday, February 21st. Stellantis NV is pausing work on next generation Jeep Compass sport utility vehicle and all of activities at its assembly plant in Brampton, Ontario. As we navigate today's dynamic environment, Stellantis continues to reassess its product strategy in North America, spokesperson Jody Tenson said Thursday in an email statement. The halt doesn't change previously announced investment plans for the Canadian factory, the company said. The plant in Brampton, near Toronto, employed about 3,000 workers and has been under a retooling program to build electric and gas-powered vehicles for the Jeep brands. It's expected to return to full capacity once that work is complete. Stellantis is examining its strategy after Chief Executive Officer Carlos Tavares departed in December under pressure from the board, which had lost patience with its declining U.S. sales last month. The automaker said it will build a new midsize pickup at its plant in Belvedere, Illinois, which had been closed under Tavares. The unexpected announcement in Brampton is a matter of grave concern, according to Uniform, the union representing the auto workers at that facility. It raises doubt about the timeline of the retooling process, the union said. The chaos and uncertainty plaguing the North American auto industry, which is under the constant threat of tariffs and/or dismantling of EV regulations from the U.S., are having real-time impacts on workers and corporate decisions, said Uniform President Lena Payne. The threats are also dangerous to our economy and to Canadian jobs. Unifor said the impact of a delayed start at Brampton would have spillover effects on local parts suppliers tied to vehicle production, including thousands of union and non-union workers. Canadian Industry Minister Francois Philippe Champagne said in a social media post that the government is in contact with Stellantis and Uniform. We'll make sure that Stellantis honors its commitments and follow through on its plans for Brampton. Stellantis announced in May 22 that it planned to invest billions in retooling its plants in Brampton and in Windsor, Ontario, to build electric vehicles, has since received further pledges of financial support from governments of Canada and Ontario. See? Getting the government involved. Yeah, I'm just reading this to y'all. I don't even see. Hold on. See, getting the government involved. Including huge subsidies for an electric vehicle battery plant in Windsor. At the time, the latter deal was announced in 2023, and it was projected that battery factories would receive as much as 15 billion Canadian, 10.6 billion in taxpayer assistance. Wow. Stellantis confirmed the company's move to Brampton in November 2023. U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened 25% tariffs on most Canadian products imported by the U.S. and in recent days has also promised 25% tariffs specifically on automobile imports. If carried out, tariffs would upend the highly integrated North American vehicle supply chain. No, they won't. Trump aims to drive auto manufacturing investment to the U.S. We don't want their cars. We want to make the cars in Detroit, Trump told Fox News earlier this month. The number of Canadian-made vehicles imported by the U.S. has dropped by about 50% in the past 10 years. Now, that's what I'm saying. You know, it's all the fear of tariffs. And, of course, I'm going to get into this into the next story, but I really believe that the whole tariffs thing is twofold. It's a negotiation ploy by President Trump to get these companies to do certain things for him, secure the borders and things of that nature, things that he finds extremely important, as well as a move to make the American people realize that, you know, if you weren't getting all these cheap products from across the pond, you would be paying the same or less for the price here in America, and you would be employing your brothers and sisters. That's what I believe. I believe that tariffs are just a way to negotiate deals with these other countries to make sure these other countries are paying their fair share, that we're not getting used and abused by these other countries, and we're getting more bang for our buck, and we're to some degree forcing the American people to buy American, to spend here, so that people here are making a living and living good lives. All right, last story, guys. We're going to check out this big story that Bloomberg did. I think it was Bloomberg. Bloomberg did this big story about the U.S. auto industry sitting in isolation as a dive into all of the things that have happened, and particularly in the automotive industry since Trump is coming into office. So I'm gonna check out this story. It's pretty long, but probably not gonna do the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? But we're gonna check it out. We're gonna break it down a little bit, and then I'm gonna get y'all up out of here.
The only way you can do it is through the threat of tariffs.
In his first few weeks in office, much of President Trump's focus has been on tariffs. He announced and then suspended 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, announced a 10% levy on goods from China effective in March,
Make America great again, right? That's what we care about.
announced tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports from around the world, and then reciprocal tariffs on the entire world as of April.
So when you imposed the tariffs the first time, you added 120,000 jobs. And since that time, it's been picked away and nicked away and excluded away. You're going to bring those 120,000 jobs back to America. You are the president who's standing up for the American steel worker.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says that tariffs would be good for jobs.
Our industry is in the midst of a disruption.
But Ford CEO Jim Farley went to Capitol Hill to tell lawmakers that the tariffs on Mexico and Canada would be a disaster for the U.S. auto industry.
I think longer term is the bigger concern. These kind of tariffs, especially in these two countries, are very significant. And if they persist beyond months, we could see billions and billions of dollars of pressure on the industry, lost jobs, lots of impacts to communities and our ecosystem in the industry.
So, and I said this a long time ago. I remember back when I was still living in Indiana and I was working at a factory, an Otis elevator factory, and they were talking about, they were about to close the plant down, and they were started to send, people to, to the another plant where they were moving some people from that plant to another plant. And the other plant was in Mexico. It was right across the border in Mexico. And I was thinking to myself, and I was thinking, because of course I didn't want to go, and I knew that I knew a couple people that went, and they said that, of course they were saying it was great and everything, but eventually all 5 of those people, I knew exactly 5 people that took the job over in Mexico and went and moved to Mexico. All 5 of those people ended up back in Indiana, looking for work, trying to find somewhere to work. And I just remember thinking that why, specifically in the automotive industry, but in any industry that deals with the import of products from somewhere else, when you do that, you open yourself up to getting, okay, you remember the story about, there was a story not that long ago about there was a company in, I think it was an Iran company that made beepers, and the Iraq, this is not exact, but the Iraq government was buying beepers from this Iran company, okay, not exact, but, and come to find out they were putting bombs in all these beepers. So they had an incident, they went to war, and all the people over in Iran set off these bombs that they had in all these beepers that had been passed out pretty much to the people in that government. Okay, it's not an exact story. I don't remember all the exact details, but you get what I'm saying. When you rely on other companies or other countries to supply you with certain things, weapons, vehicles, all of these things like that, they have the ability to make these things weapons against you if you were to go into war. Now, that was always a big thought in my head, was that I didn't think that us importing a lot of products from another place was a good idea, because if we ever went to war with these companies, then they would already have the ability to create problems for us when it comes to the products that they send over. They could send over cars that are going to not work after a certain period of time, or tanks, guns that could break down after a short time, have a pin that's going to break down after a couple uses. They have a power over us when it comes to the products that we get from them. So I always thought that was always my biggest fear or desire, to not be a place that did a lot of importing of products that we need eventually.
The Council on Foreign Relations estimates that the U.S. auto industry may be among the hardest hit. So it's no surprise that automaker stocks have underperformed the S&P 500 since President Trump's election, with a pronounced dip since the announcement of tariffs.
If you look at the landscape of the auto industry, it represents about 5% of GDP. It's about $1.2 trillion of activity, with almost, in the case of manufacturing and parts, that represents about 2 million workers.
Ellen Hughes Cromwick is a senior fellow at Third Way and spent much of her career as the chief global economist at Ford before serving in the Department of Commerce under President Obama.
There's no question that tariffs raise inflation.
S&P Global Mobility estimates that the average $25,000 price of a car imported from Mexico or Canada could go up by $6,250 if tariffs take effect. The 50 best-selling models in the U.S. market account for about 60% of the market volume, half of which would be directly affected by the tariffs.
Then buy the other half. Then rely on the other half and not those that would be affected by the amount of money that would be included in the tariff. The whole thing for me is that, I like variety. I'm not going to lie and say I don't like variety and I like getting stuff, I've purchased things from overseas. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if you're going to make the statement that, it's a bad thing because they're going to be more expensive from overseas, then wouldn't that behoove you to purchase here? I mean, unless you're trying to say that you would be paying less money for those products because they come from overseas, and if you buy it here, then it's going to be more expensive, then, that's a different story. But, in these times, most prices are competitive. So if you're going to see a situation where you're going to have to pay an additional, $6,000 for a vehicle just because it comes from overseas, then buy a car here. Don't pay the $6,000. Makes sense to me.
The importer pays the tariff, not the company that's exporting to the United States. So number one, that business has a choice to make. Either they pay the tariff and import the goods, or they begin to substitute away from those imported product and try to find other sources.
So in that context, then, they don't have to pass over that cost to the consumer. They can just eat it. Or they could, source their products or the things that they need that's going to cost them to have to pay a tariff, source them from American companies and no tariffs.
They could also pass along that increase in their cost because of the import tariff to their end market customers.
They don't have
and
to.
It, in general, will just simply raise prices.
The hit the auto producers may suffer from tariffs is already being seen, not only in their stock prices, but in their being less profitable than their suppliers for the first time in 6 years. And RBC calculates that it will be the U.S. producers, GM, Ford, and Stellantis, that will be hit the hardest. Imposing tariffs on inputs...
Of course they will. And that bothers me. Let's see if we can get that back up there. That bothers me.
Thousands of parts. So shifting that process into a complex task in the United States. But alternative, of course, might be for U.S.
Quite a dramatic shift ongoing now. 25%
during the last.
Number one, that business has a choice to make. Either they pay the tariff and import the goods, or they begin to substitute away from those imported product and try to find other sources. They could also pass along that increase in their cost because of the import tariff to their end market customers. And it, in general, will just simply raise prices.
The hit the auto producers may suffer from tariffs is already being seen, not only in their stock prices, but in their being less profitable than their suppliers for the first time in 6 years. And RBC calculates that it will be the U.S. producers, GM.
Look, all right, so look at this. Look at this. I have a major problem with this. The most hit will be companies that are U.S. automakers, and the least hit is the ones that are not U.S. automakers, Volkswagen, the BMWs, the Mercedes-Benz. That doesn't make sense. Why is it that our U.S. automakers are the ones that rely so much on imports for their vehicles? Why is that? See, that's why I believe that it has been, specifically for Stellantis, has been strategic to kind of destroy U.S. automakers by relying so much on imports to the point where you are paying more to other countries than you are to the U.S. for these vehicles. Literally, you're paying more to all these other companies, to the Mexicos, to the Canadas that build all these parts and build all these cars that come into America than you are paying to the American people when these are American U.S. automakers.
Ford, and Stellantis that will be hit the hardest. Imposing tariffs on inputs to any products made in the United States will increase costs. But in the case of tariffs on auto parts crossing the Mexican or Canadian borders, the problem is particularly acute, given the complexity of the supply chains and the need for parts to cross the border several times over the course of production. Everett Eisenstadt served as the deputy director of the National Economic Council under President Trump during the last term, where he has seen trade sentiment go from integrated to protectionist.
So the 25% tariff would have a pretty disruptive impact on the integration that has been ongoing now for a couple of decades. And it would be quite a dramatic shift, I think, if that were to go into effect for a sustained period of time.
One alternative, of course, might be for U.S. automakers simply to source all their parts in the United States.
Yes.
But putting together an automobile is a complex task. Most have tens of thousands of parts. So shifting that process entirely back to the United States is unrealistic.
Why? Why would it be unrealistic? We can build here, we can build parts here, we can do all those things that you mentioned here in the United States. Why would it be unrealistic? See, the idea to even state that it'd be unrealistic is asinine, to the point where most of these U.S. automakers were mainly from here in the beginning. And the thought process that we here in the U.S. can't make these parts or don't have the ability to make these parts is a problem. We should be able to do all of the things that are required for these vehicles to be put on the road here in the U.S. The fact that these parts may be coming faster or cheaper or anything like that from across seas is irrelevant to the fact that we know we can make those parts here, we can make them at a comparable price, and we can still use them to the point where all of the money is coming to the U.S.
And certainly couldn't be done quickly.
Any assembly of a vehicle, that product cycle can be 3 to 5 years. Now, back into the supply chain and look at a tier 3 supplier. Hundreds of these supplier businesses have to then start to think, okay, well, what investments do I have to make in order to supply that part to Ford Motor Company, for example?
What makes it worse for auto companies is that they are not working with substantial margins to begin with, which makes fundamental changes in the way they produce that much more difficult.
There's enough excess capacity to generate a very competitive industry with, when you look at many of the companies with very thin profit margins. And if you, for example, say, okay, I want to be more resilient for this particular component going into my vehicle, but if I dual source or decide I'm going to try to source over a few different suppliers, I'm going to be adding cost.
The U.S. auto industry has a long history of reckoning with federal national security and trade policy.
One, you had the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was designed to enable the U.S. auto sector to compete with China and other markets that were starting to produce manufacturing at a much reduced cost. And the idea was you could create a North American supply chain that would make the U.S. competitive, that would enable the exports to continue from the United States. The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which was something that President Obama had negotiated, which was one of the last efforts to really bring integration at the highest levels among many economies. That agreement was panned pretty badly by both then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, but also soon-to-be President Trump. That was really the end of the integrated effort for the United States. So this kind of shift away towards integration, just-in-time delivery, towards a more unilateral trade approach has been brewing for quite some time. Now we're into an acceleration of that unilateral trade pattern. So it's a trajectory that's been ongoing for a while. I think it will be ongoing for quite some time.
The higher costs and disruption that the threatened tariffs represent for U.S. automakers come to an industry already struggling to deal with a massive transition to electric vehicles. GM committed to shift 50% of its fleet to EVs by 2030, but delayed plans for a new electric Buick last year, citing lower than expected EV adoption. Policies under the Biden administration, namely the Inflation Reduction Act, attempted to support EV adoption, but the Trump administration is now saying it will pull back on those initiatives.
When you have situations where policy moves back and forth, and you saw it most recently, under President Biden, you had a lot of incentives to go to electric vehicles. And with the emissions requirements, it really almost forced them to produce a certain type of vehicle. Now you've got an administration with a very different perspective that is not as focused on those emission standards, that actually is putting a different type of pressure on the industry. It takes time to adapt, and I think it puts a lot of pressure on the ability to plan a long-term trajectory for the industry. And at some point, that's going to be impactful.
Now, if you pull the rug out from under that brand new industry with thousands of jobs, we're basically making all that capital investment just way inefficient and wasted. And that isn't really a way to run the country either. I mean, we want to support businesses to be competitive and to grow and to create jobs. We don't want to destroy wealth by penalizing companies that made those investments over the last several years. And I think, that's just a misguided business policy approach.
While the U.S. goes back and forth on its commitment to electric vehicles, the rest of the world moves ahead, with U.S. EV adoption largely flatlining since hitting the tipping point of 5% of new car sales in 2021. But wherever the government ends up on tariffs or on EV incentives, the one thing that is certain is that for the industry to thrive, it needs the certainty that it is not getting.
We need to remember that the U.S. auto industry doesn't sit in isolation. We're part of a global economy. And there's a lot of other actors in the world, and while we may wish that we had the auto industry we did in the early ages and the U.S. was completely dominant, the reality is there's a lot of other players in this sector now. There's a lot of other countries that have very, very productive, robust automobile exports, and I hope...
And that's the problem. That's the biggest problem is that, with the massive loss of market share with all of these new EV companies, all the new automakers that are popping up left and right, with the loss of market share, they're just not making the margins that they would need to, push forward with new advancements, to push forward with, the movement of factories to the U.S. So it is a hard process. I don't doubt that. It is definitely a process that's going to happen. We're going to have to move forward in the process of, getting companies to buy into the U.S. and bring factories here to support their production of their automotive vehicles, specifically the new EV vehicles, the BYDs, the Lucids of the world, and those type of things, so that we continue to have a foot in the newness of the automotive industry, specifically when it comes to EV vehicles. So
there are ancillary policies that come into play that enable the industry to make the kind of adjustments they're going to need, both with capital investments and to make sure they're able to get the technology they need here in the United States, the workforce they need in the United States. the ability to get products and regulations, to move quickly in getting facilities up and running, because you can't wait a year or two for everything to be perfect. You got to constantly be running in this industry.
All right, that was a great story. Really touched on the auto industry right now when it specifically comes to tariffs and Trump's and the moves that the U.S. auto industry has to make to just survive. We live in a situation where we've given up a lot when it comes to what we need for vehicles to be on the road here in the U.S., what we need to support the automotive industry, because the automotive industry has suffered immensely. We've seen a lot of loss. 2024 saw massive losses and layoffs when it comes to automotive factories and dealerships and closings of dealerships and all of these things because of the growth that the automotive industry is making. And the problem is that the U.S. is not the mainstay of this growth. The U.S. has fallen back, specifically Stellantis and the big three. All of these U.S. automakers have taken a stumble, taken lots of losses. Carlos Tavares was absolutely horrible for Stellantis to the point where he tried to make Jeep and Ram these high-priced vehicles to the point where nobody was buying them anymore. So it just put Stellantis in a horrible situation where the sales was horrible and tanking everywhere. And the Fords and the GMs of the world, they still in themselves haven't advanced far when it comes to EVs and new model vehicles and things of that nature. So all of them have taken massive market share losses, massive margins, massive losses in margin, and they have to spend a massive amount of time to redirect. And I think that Trump is here to help that. I think that him forcing other countries to pay for certain things is going to put some ease on the automotive industry, is going to put some pressure on the automotive industry to make sure it does bring some products back to the U.S., some production back to the U.S., and bring some jobs back to the U.S. Because that's what it's all about. That's what we need when it comes to the U.S. auto industry and what we need for growth here. Because the U.S. auto industry is the backbone of the U.S. It has been for a very long time. It has suffered quite a lot. STEM and all these other things have taken a major step forward, specifically computers and cyber stuff has taken a major step forward, but the automotive industry still is a major backbone of the U.S. and we need to protect it and we need to grow it. And I very hope that the Trump administration is here to help us do that. All right, my friends, I'm going to let y'all get up out of here. It's been a long day. It's getting hot. The sun is out. The beach is calling. And I will see y'all later. Please like, share, subscribe. And I'm out. Peace.